Welcome to Mr. Thailander's review of the factoring unit. Let's get right into it. You want to be prepared for the test? Let's get you prepared. So the first step in any factoring problem should always be to look for a greatest common factor. And in here we will see that each number here is divisible by 8 and there's at least one t in each term. So we can factor out an 8t. Remember that when you factor out, you're dividing. And so 24 divided by 8 is 3. And then the s stays because it wasn't factored out. The second term, 32 divided by 8 is 4, and t squared divided by t is t. And that's just a very simple greatest common factoring problem. Now, this problem doesn't have a greatest common factor, but there are 4 terms. And whenever we see 4 terms, we immediately want to think, ooh, this might be factoring by grouping. Remember, my tip is to put a plus between those, leave the negative in the parentheses. So when we factor out of the first term, I can factor out a 3x squared. I don't like the way that 3 looks. I can factor out a 3x squared. And what's left behind is 4x plus 5. Now, out of the second grouping, I can factor a 2. And what's left behind is negative 4x minus 5. Uh-oh. See, for factoring by grouping to work, this and this have to be the same, and right now they're not. But they're very close. The only difference is the sign. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a negative 2. And that's going to change the sign, because remember, when you factor out, you're dividing. Dividing everything by negative 1 will change its sign. And now this and this are the same. So we can write this as 3x squared minus 2 times 4x plus 5. Now, in this parenthesis here, we still have something that has a second degree on it. Whoopsie, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. We still have something that has a second degree on it. So we look at it and see if I can factor it. Well, it's got 2 terms, there's no greatest common factor, and it's not a factor by grouping, a difference of squares, so I'm going to leave it alone. It's not a difference of squares, not a difference of cubes, sum of cubes, so we are done with that problem. Next one, now, getting right into it, 3 terms. So it's a trinomial, and it's a second degree trinomial. And a is not 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a times c and get negative 18. And I'm going to look for 2 numbers that multiply together to give me negative 18, but add up to negative 3. And we could list out all the pairs, but I'm going to go ahead and cut to the chase and tell you those 2 numbers are negative 6 and 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to split negative 3x into negative 6x plus 3x minus 9. So we split negative 3x. Then we're going to group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. And we're going to pull out the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor in the first one is 2x, and that leaves me x minus 3. The greatest common factor in the second grouping is 3, and that leaves me x minus 3. Once again, we've accomplished our goal because we have the same thing in the first and second set of parentheses. Oh, we're getting an announcement. Sorry for that interruption. So we will have 2x plus 3 times x minus 3. All right, moving right along. So we're looking at this problem. Only 2 terms, so it's a binomial. Whenever we have a binomial, we want to look and see if it's one of the special binomials. Difference of cubes, sum of cubes, or difference of squares. Remember, we're looking for those numbers that are squares. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, 144, 169. If we see any of those, we should be looking for sum or difference of squares. And sure enough, right there, we got two of them, 36 and 16. So that means that this is probably going to be a difference of squares. And so what's being squared? Well, the first term is 6a, and the second term that's being squared is 4b. When we do a difference of squares, we just make one positive and one negative. And there we are, we're all factored. That is how you factor out the difference of squares. Now, this one's tricky because initially it looks like we got a problem here because the first number is -1. And we could go AC and multiply -1 times 18, but there's actually a slightly easier way to do this. I hate it when there's a negative in front. And so in order to make my life easier, I'm just going to factor out a -1. And what that's going to do is that's going to change the sign on everything. Now I have a trinomial where a is 1. And so I'm just looking for what two numbers multiply together to give me -18 that add up to 3. And those two numbers are +6 and -3. Now, if you see this on the SOL, they might write it like this, or they might have something like this, where they distribute the -1 into one of the two things. You could also have it like that. All three of these are the same. And I would give you full credit for any one of those three answers. Let's move on to number 6. Factor 6x squared plus 15x minus 21. All right, once again, it's a trinomial, but a is not 1. So we're going to have to multiply a times c. And so it would be 6 times -21. Oh, you know what? I made a mistake. Let's start this one over. Because I didn't do what's always our first step. Our first step is always to see if we can pull out a greatest common factor. And in this case, we can. Now a times c got a lot easier because I'm trying to factor what's here in the parentheses. And a times c is -14. So I need two things that multiply together to give me -14. And that's going to be 7 and -2. So I will write this as 3 times 2x squared minus 2x plus 7x minus 7. And so we split the 5x into -2x and 7x. Remember, if given the choice, always write the negative split first, because it's going to make the factoring by grouping a little bit easier. So when I factor here, I'm still going to have the 3. But then out of the first parentheses, I can factor out 2x. And what's left is x minus 1. And out of the second grouping, I can factor a 7. And what's left is x minus 1. And so I can write this all down as 3 times 2x plus 7 times x minus 1. Number 7. All right, it's two terms, so it's a binomial. We're looking to see if it's one of the special binomials. And in fact, remember, in addition to looking for the squares, we're always looking for the cubes. 1, 8, 27, 64, 125. And sure enough, we're seeing one of those special numbers there. So this is a sum of squares. And so remember your pattern is you write down the numbers that are being squared to give you those. Those are A and B. And then the first term here will be a squared, a times b, b squared. So x times x is x squared. 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times 2 is 4. The last thing is we need to get our signs, and so we're going to use SOAP. Remember, SOAP stands for same, opposite, always positive. Same, opposite, always positive. And if you remember that, then you will get the exact same pattern for a difference of cubes. The only thing that'll change are the signs, but as long as you follow SOAP, you'll get the signs right. All right, here's another one. Once again, this looks like a tough problem, but remember, our first step is to always factor out the greatest common factor. Now we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give you -5 and 1. Well, the problem is there are no two numbers that multiply together to give you -1. Sorry, they multiply together to give you -5 that add up to -1. They don't exist. So even though this is a second-degree trinomial, what's in parentheses here is prime, so this is now fully factored. All right, number 9. First step, as we said before, look for a greatest common factor. Greatest common factor here is 2x, and that leaves me x squared minus 4. Now what I have in parentheses here, it still has a second power, so I want to see if I can factor that further. And sure enough, it is a difference of squares, so this will factor out that way. All right, here we have, remember we're looking for our cubes, and here we have a difference of cubes. So let's go through that again. Remember, we get the first set of parentheses and the second set of parentheses. First set is going to be 2x and 1. Because what cube gives me x cubed and what cube gives me 1. Then, to get the second set of parentheses, we square the first term. We multiply the two terms. And then we square the last term. And then to get our signs, once again, we just SOAP it up. It's a negative, so same, opposite, always positive. And now we have factored our difference of cubes. Did I say difference of squares earlier? I may have, and if so, I apologize. You can smack me on the back of the hand when you come to class. Number 11. Once again, all the numbers are even, so we know that there is a greatest common factor of at least 2. So now we have a trinomial where a is 1. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give me 16 that add up to -8. And those two numbers are x minus 4, -4, -4. But since this and this are the same, we really should write this as x minus 4 squared. Next up, we have number 12. Number 12, I'm just going to go ahead and write up prime right in advance, because this is a sum of squares. We cannot do a sum of squares. It is always prime. Okay, now we're getting into it. No greatest common factor here, so we're going to have to go a times c, because a is not 1, and we'll get 90. So the question is, what two numbers multiply together to give me 90 that add up to 15? Now you can write out all the factor pairs if you want, but I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead and tell you that they're -6 and -15. So we will have 6x squared, and then we will split -23 into -6x Actually, I'm going to do this slightly differently. Sorry, doesn't matter which one I put first because they're both negative. Negative 15 plus negative 6x plus 15. And then we're going to group the first two terms and the second two terms. And so out of the first term, what I'm going to factor is oh, I messed up here. Let me see here. What I'm going to factor out of here sorry, there's someone outside my door waving, is that we're going to factor out of here a 3x. That leaves me with 2x minus 5. Out of the second one, I'm going to factor out a 3. That will leave me negative 2x plus 5. So I'm going to have to do my old trickaroo where I factor out a negative and change the signs. And now I have 3x minus 3 times 2x minus 5. Something doesn't smell right there. I don't trust that answer. Give me 1 second to double check my work. Haha, found my mistake. My mistake is all the way back at the beginning of the problem. So we're going to have to erase all of this and start over because that's all correct, but this is not. It's negative 8 times negative 15. So we'll just start this whole problem over, and I'll just put the negative 8x first, and then the negative... No, you know what? We're going to stick with putting the negative 15 first, just because that might confuse some people if we don't. Now we're ready to rumble. Now we factor by grouping. Factor out here. And that'll leave me 2x minus 5. This still doesn't smell right to me. Where am I making my mistake? Well, we'll find it here in a second. Hold on. Wow, this problem's giving me trouble today. This, ladies and gentlemen, is why you shouldn't make videos on Friday afternoons. Because I've now messed this problem up twice, but we'll get it right here the third time. Here we go. The problem is that I keep writing the numbers down wrong. The two numbers in question, because negative 8 plus negative 15, well, it adds up to 23, does not multiply together to give you 120. So what we're going to do is we're going to fall back and nuke the site from orbit and list all the factor pairs. There we go. Now we have our pair. So this will be 6x squared minus 5x minus 18x plus 15. And now we're off to the races at long, long last. So we'll factor out an x, and I'll get 6x minus 5. And then I'll factor out a negative 3, and I'll get 6x minus 5. These two are the same, and our long nightmare is over. We have actually successfully factored the problem. Sorry for the confusion. Let's go on to the next one. Here we go. So as we move ahead, oh, did I skip one? I think I skipped one. There is a problem missing. Sorry, let's go ahead and put it on in. problem, the next problem they're asking you to factor is two x squared plus 32. Now, at first glance, this looks like it's going to be trouble because it's a binomial and we don't see one of our special numbers. But remember, our first step is always to factor out the greatest common factor. Now, this, though, cannot be factored because that is a sum of squares. And so once we get to that point, we stop. If this had been 2x squared minus 32, then we might have been able to work forward. But we're stuck there, so we stop. All right, for this one, a times c is 100. So I need two numbers that multiply together to give me 100 that add up to negative 20. And those two numbers are negative 10 and negative 10. So I will go 4x squared minus 10x plus 25. I will group. And the greatest common factor is going to be 2x, and that leaves me 2x minus 5. And I'll pull out a negative 5, and that leaves me 2x minus 5, which is 2x minus 5 times 2x minus 5, which is 2x minus 5 squared. Okay, now here's one of the ones where we get a hint. And so we're going to go ahead and divide this synthetically. Negative 2, and I will go 1, 3, negative 10, negative 24. Bring down the first number, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add. So what this means is that I could write the original problem as x plus 2 times x squared plus x minus 12. But what I have here in this set of parentheses can still be factored. So the x plus 2 will keep, but I'll break down what's inside those parentheses into x plus 4 times x minus 3. And so that's the end of the problems on the review, but we're going to make like a Marvel movie and give you an after credit scene. So let's factor this. And this problem at first glance looks almost impossible. But if we look at it, every term is even. Matter of fact, there's a greatest common factor of 4x. And that will leave me with 3x squared minus xy plus, minus, if I keep the sign straight, minus 2y squared. Now, I have inside the parentheses a second degree trinomial. So I'm going to go a times c is negative 6. And so I'll have negative 3 and 2. So I'm going to rewrite this as 4x times 3x squared minus 3x y plus 2xy minus 2y squared. And then I will group the first two and the second two terms, and I will get 4x times 3x times x minus y plus 2y times x minus y. And so this whole thing will factor out as 4x times 3x plus 2y times x minus y. Good luck on your test. See you next class. Sorry about that one problem.